officially, Strategy now owns 3% of the Bitcoin supply. Now, normally, I would say, you know, first of all, as a Bitcoiner, I don't like, you know, it's Bitcoin. Anyone could do whatever they want with it. I would prefer for not as much Bitcoin being concentrated in such just one entity. I'd rather it be distributed. But at the end of the day, like if people are willing to sell their Bitcoin to Michael Saylor, then so be it, right? But the reason I don't like it is twofold. Number one, such a concentration in one entity, like what is it like? What does that do for the like what are the implications of that? Like, you know, like it's like if you buy 100% of something, you know, like does it have value, right? Like at what point does it like not to? At what point does it start to become counterintuitive, right? Like at what point, like at what percentage is it like, okay, like I want 10% of the supply and then 90% everybody else owns, and like that's the best return. But like, what if he owns 25? I don't think he'll get to 25%, but I'm just saying this for argument's sake. What if he gets to 25% of the supply? Does it make sense for everyone to, you know, own the other 75%? I don't know. That's above my pay grade. That's not what I want to talk about today, but just a thought. Where I am concerned, and this is a real concern just because of the historical context, is when there's such a concentration of supply owned by an entity, and that entity custodies their Bitcoin with Coinbase, which custodies the Bitcoin of the majority of the ETFs, of the majority of the Bitcoin that a lot of these companies own. They're all custodied with Coinbase. And that is not a good thing. I'm taking you guys back in time to the infamous 6102 order. This was an executive order signed April 5th of 1933, where President FDR forbade the, quote, hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. At the time, in the years that followed, this policy was highly controversial, and it faced criticism from those who asserted it was completely immoral and a flagrant violation of solemn promises made in the Gold Standard Act of 1900. Now, think about it from just like, you know, first principles perspective. The president, right, the leader of a country, made it illegal for you to hold metal, right? Like if you just break it down and you just simplify it, that's what they did. Now, why did they do that? They did that because the United States was in a pickle, right? It was in a pickle. The rationale, the stated reason for the order was that hard times had caused hoarding, right? Hoarding sounds very similar to HODLing, does it not? Of gold, stalling economic growth and worsening the depression. So think about it this way, just for a second, right? They're printing an ungodly amount of money in an unsustainable fashion, right? This is not sustainable. Lynn Alden, nothing stops this train. Larry Lepard, you know, the big print. You saw that comment from BitPain, right? I would rather burn my house to the ground than you getting it. So could you imagine in the future you getting this type of language, right? We are concerned about the holding of Bitcoin because it's stalling economic growth and it's worsening the depression that we caused because we inflated the money supply. Like, that's not a stretch. That's not a stretch at all, right? That's like, you know, it's like, this is not the current fiscal path of the United States. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. We're starting to feel the effects of that, right? The wealth inequality in society is growing. You see the M2 money supply. No one's buying the bonds. The bonds are being bought by the Federal Reserve itself. Eventually something cracks. And then when something cracks, inevitably what happens is This is the type of stuff that happens. Governments switch back to a hard money standard. But if they don't have that hard money standard to switch back to, what happens? Right? This is the type of situation that happened, right? So, yeah, just switch the wording. The stated reason for the order was that hard times have caused the HODLing of Bitcoin, stalling economic growth and worsening the depression. You could see the exact same. You just switch the words. It's basically the same thing. And I'm not the only one to think this way, by the way. Here's Alex Gladstein agreeing to Turtle Post. The U.S. government now owns 10% of Intel. Could this also happen to the companies custodying Bitcoin? Here's what we wrote in our most recent report. That said, the historic risk to custodied Bitcoin remains. At the moment, it is probably a very low risk, given the current administration's posture and the broader institutional trend. But that could change and will depend on which jurisdiction investors reside in. History shows that measures once thought extreme can quickly become popular under the right pressures. A future administration, especially in the context of out of control budgetary deficits and escalating domestic and military conflicts, might take a more adversarial stance. In such a scenario, large stashes of Bitcoin that are held in heavily regulated onshore entities would be considered, quote, low-hanging fruit and thus the most vulnerable to confiscation or forced rehypothecation in order to borrow cash. So let me translate that for you, because this is what happened during the 6102 order. They stole the gold, and in return, they gave paper. Right. And the offset was crazy, like the way that they pulled it off. Like, check this out. In 1934, the Gold Reserve Act was passed, changing the statutory gold content of the US dollar from $20 to $35 an ounce. This effectively devalued the dollar, reducing the amount of gold required to back US currency, enabling the Federal Reserve to expand the money supply. And mind you, this was before Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. They did the same thing. This is what I'm trying to tell you guys. So if we are to kind of summarize it all up, right? And then I'll pass it on to Opti to hear his point, right? So today we need to talk about something that sounds straight out of a collectivist playbook. The U.S. government now owns about 10% of Intel. That's right. Washington converted nearly $9 billion in so-called CHIPS Act grants into actual equity, which means the federal government is now a major shareholder in one of America's largest tech companies. There's many, many different words for that, right? How do I say this in the most inclusive, nice way possible? I'm sure you guys have heard the phrase, seizing the means of production, right? This is not capitalism. It's creeping state ownership. And history shows us what happens when governments blur the line between public money and private enterprise. There's a word for that, actually. It starts with an F. You get cronyism, distortion, and eventual control. It looks a lot less like America and a lot like the state-run industrial policies we supposedly oppose. The government is not meant to run a corporation. The government is not, that is not the role of government. The goal of government is to protect private property, to keep law and order. The role of government is not to get into business. That is the role of the individual. History has shown the more freedom the individual has to take risks, to become an entrepreneur, the more prosperous a society is. History has shown the more control a government takes over the economy, the less prosperous that economy is. So what does this matter for Bitcoin? Why should you guys care? Because it shows you exactly how desperate the government is willing to get when backed into a corner. We've seen this before. In 1933, Executive Order 6102 forced Americans to hand over their gold to the government. Could they try something similar with Bitcoin? They can't reach it in cold wallets, but they could absolutely target US exchanges and ETFs, where custody is centralized. If the state ever gets into a bind, the easiest move is to 6102 the Bitcoin sitting on regulated exchanges and say they're doing it for national security. That's where MicroStrategy, now called Strategy, comes in. They hold 3% of all Bitcoin in existence, about 630,000 coins. If regulators wanted to pressure one corporate entity that represents a massive slice of supply, they already have their target in sight. So here's the takeaway. Government now owns 10% of Intel. Don't be shocked if one day they move on Bitcoin held inside the system. If your Bitcoin is on an exchange, you don't really own it. Only self-custody, only cold storage keep you outside of their reach. History doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme sometime. 6102 happened once, and this Intel deal proves the state is still very comfortable picking up winners and seizing control. Don't let them seize yours, which is exactly why we advocate for self-custody every single day on Simply Bitcoin. Anyways, Opti, 3% of the supply of Bitcoin and Coinbase's Bitcoin and the ETF Bitcoin. Now I know why the Trump administration is not so interested in stacking the Bitcoin. These companies are stacking the Bitcoin for them. All it needs is just one executive order and that Bitcoin becomes theirs, right? Because that's what FDR did. I'm just saying. Like, yeah, why pay for something if you could just make an order and it's yours?
Well, and going a little deeper, BlackRock and Strategy combined hold about 6.5% of the total Bitcoin supply currently. So, you know, there's a couple of avenues and companies that they could potentially, nationalize or take a stake in as they're framing this. And if you think we're just kind of speculating or putting our tinfoil hats on, remember what they said in the Digital Working Assets group that just came out a couple of weeks ago. They literally said, or rather Scott Bessent said it very publicly. Yeah, we're not going to buy anymore, but we are very interested in confiscating your coin. I don't know. Look, I know we're speculating. I know this is kind of maybe you could say fear mongering at this point.
I don't think so, dude. That's what I was been around here a minute. Yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to say, but this is not out of the realm of possibility of what's going on if you historically kind of think in the context of what government has done in the past. I think this is a non-zero chance that this could happen, which is why I would argue, and we've been arguing on the show for a long time, you probably don't want to put all your stack into a strategy product here. You probably don't want to keep all of your Bitcoin on an exchange. If this doesn't ring alarms in your head right now and doesn't make you want to learn how to self-custody your Bitcoin if you've never had before, like this should be the time to do it. You want to prepare now because who knows what's going to happen in the future. We've been saying it for a long time. As much as we like a lot of the nice rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration right now and even nation states around the world.
Breaking.
Wow. Breaking. That literally, wow. Let's go.
U.S. government to take ownership in more companies.
Wait, what time is this? What time is it for you right now?
This was an hour ago.
Okay, an hour ago. He's in European time. Yeah, so like if
you psychedelic Marco, United States Communist Party.
It's like as I was saying, as much as we like a lot of the favorable rhetoric coming out of these nation states, remember what governments are really good at. It is seizing your property here. So this is why you need to take your Bitcoin into custody. This is why self-custodying your Bitcoin is the most important aspect of this. This is the revolutionary act, controlling your money, because who knows when something like this will actually happen. And we've had a pretty good track record on this show. Now, I don't think this is going to happen like next year, but from that tweet, it could possibly happen a lot sooner than we think. But this is something that Bitcoiners have been saying for a long time. Remember, this is the separation of money and state. And as the state kind of gets backed into a corner, they start to lash out even more vicious than they have in the past. And I think this would be one of the most vicious moves here. Tentatively embrace the Bitcoin industry and then just seize the Bitcoin treasury companies. That'd be crazy.
I said this the other day. I posted this on X. I said, what's really crazy about Bitcoin is that not only does it prove that money can exist without the state, it proves that money is better without the state. And that is a extremely powerful and revolutionary idea. And you have to understand that there's a tremendous amount of power the state has from being able to control money. But here's the thing. The citizens gave the state that power. We empowered the state because there was no other way to do money. There was no other, there was different versions of it, but it seemed like the best way was to give the power to the government so that the government would be the issuers of money, right? Because we trusted the government. We had democratic control over the government. Bitcoin, supposedly. Bitcoin comes and it's like, hey, there's rules, but there's no rulers. And actually, the money's even better. So then now the state has to justify its control over the money. Because if you live in a democratic society, the whole point of them having control is for the better of society. That's the whole point of it. But what happens when there's a system that comes that proves that, hey, listen, it's not about us controlling it or you controlling it. No one controls it, and it's actually better for everyone. The state has to justify its control. And they're going to do that with media. They're going to do that with attacks on self-custody. They're going to do that. It's not going to just roll over and say, all right, guys, here are the keys. You know what? You're right. This is better money. No. You have an entire system and bureaucracy that is literally supported by the money printer. You're talking about millions of people, right, that are addicted to this printed money that is being stifled from the population, right? And that system isn't just going to say, all right, guys, you're right. This is sound money. This is good. This is hopeful for whatever. No. I don't think it's going to do that. Sal, what's your take? And then we're going to talk about fitness.
Opti said it, and a bunch of people in the chat said it. If you think there is a non-zero chance that this might happen, take your Bitcoin in self-custody and protect yourself and your family. And it's as simple as that. If it's a chance, why risk it?
Need liquidity without having to sell your Bitcoin? For more than 6 years now, Ledn has been the trusted choice for Bitcoin-backed lending with transparency, security, and trust at their core. I absolutely love these guys, and I personally not only have an account with them, but also a loan. And some of the key features that I love about Ledn is the fact that there are no monthly payments. You pay at the end of the term. You also have the ability to roll over the loan as well, and you can pay it back whenever you want. Essentially what they do is that they help their clients unlock the liquidity of their BTC, allowing you to HODL while still accessing the wealth of your Bitcoin. They've been battle tested with their focus on transparency, security, and trust, allowing them to build a proven track record of client success and security, helping tens of thousands of clients harness the value of their digital assets with confidence and peace of mind. Learn more about what your BTC can do for you today. Simply Bitcoin viewers get 0.25% off their first loan by using the link in the video/podcast description. What are you waiting for? Head over to ledn.io today.